Hi, and welcome to Serenity in Leadership's series on leading responsibly with integrity and purpose. A series dedicated to conversations with people who are shining examples of this kind of leadership. I'm Thom Dennis, the CEO of Serenity in Leadership, and today I'm delighted to welcome Minter Dial to the podcast. Minter is an international professional speaker, elevator, and a multiple award-winning author. Minter's core career stint of 16 years was spent as a top executive at L'Oréal, where he was a member of the Worldwide Executive Committee for the Professional Products Division. And previously, he was MD of L'Oréal PPD Canada and MD worldwide for Redken. He's the author of the Second World War biography and documentary film, The Last Ring Home, and 3 award-winning business books, Future Proof and You Lead, both of which won Business Book Awards, and Heartificial Empathy. He has a weekly podcast, Minter Dialogue, and is currently working on a new book, Dialogos, Fostering More Meaningful Conversations. Welcome to you, Minter.
Well, Tom, thank you for having me. Lovely to be with you.
Excellent. So let's dive straight in. One of your main areas of interest is empathy and how in business it can drive transformation, customer centricity, and employee engagement. But whilst everyone has a natural capacity for empathy, why are some of us better at being empathetic than others? And is it a skill we can learn?
Well, the good news is it is absolutely a skill one can learn. And it does take effort. So it's not going to happen by magic, sleeping on novels. You actually have to take the time to think about other people, take the time to listen to other people. And as far as whether we are more or less capable, definitely there are some people who are more prone to be empathic. There are 2 types of empathy. One of which is harder to invent, if you will, or to learn, which is the feeling empathy, where you feel what someone else is feeling. The other one is significantly easier to learn, and this is cognitive empathy, where you just basically have to apply yourself to wish to understand what the other person is thinking, feeling, or experiencing. And to the extent that you have that desire, you can definitely learn and improve your empathy.
Can there be such a thing as too much empathy?
Indeed, there can. Not only there are 2 types of too much empathy. The first is what's called being an empath, which is someone who essentially ends up suffering from being too empathic. They can't really even help themselves. They constantly look at every situation, every person's feelings, and spend considerable emotional energy understanding what the other person's feeling and thinking. And that can be a real load if you start looking around, especially in today's world, where there's so many people describing mental health disorders, whether it's just anxiety or depression. And if you're an empath, that'll bleed into you as well. The second form of too much empathy, in my opinion, is in business when you try to be empathic all the time with everybody. Mm-hmm. You might be able to do it. And I suggest that helps in many instances. However, doing it all the time, everywhere, with everybody, not possible, not a good idea. It puts you up for the risk of disappointment, if that's what you suggest you do. And second of all, it's going to impede your ability to take decisions. You do need sometimes to take hard decisions. You do need to, let's say, lay off people or make strategic issues. And while you can use empathy to deliver that bad news, if you're constantly only worried about what everyone's feeling, it'll be hard to get off the pot.
And also you lose respect, don't you, in that sort of...
Well, that is a most interesting thought. 79% of CEOs describe fear of losing respect should they be empathic. And that for me is a misnomer. The idea of showing vulnerability in leadership, moments on stage in front of people, you don't want to be a wimp Sure. But being an empathic person doesn't mean being a wimp. It doesn't mean being nice all the time. It means having the care, really a human care for the other person. So even if you're delivering a hard message, I can be careful about how I deliver it. You don't need to be an ass when you do it. Being an ass doesn't make you a strong person. It just makes you an arse.
You heard it first here.
That's it. I've been careful with my French, Tom. I mean, since I know your Français is very good, I don't want to speak too much French.
So businesses were just really beginning to recover from the pandemic when the cost of living crisis hit us. And many, many people are really suffering now. So what can leaders do to make sure their people are okay?
So there's a layered or nuanced answer to this. The reality of business is different than the reality of home. And it is not the job of a CEO and the leadership team to take care of all the mental health issues. So you have to contain what you're trying to achieve. Second of all, you actually have to perform, because if you don't survive, you serve no further purpose. So as an organization, you do have to make sure that the horse is before the cart so that it can move forward. With that said, there are all sorts of different ways you can do better. And I think it's also really important to be realistic about how you approach this. So there's a lot of do-gooding. There's a lot of prescribing of doing well and helping with well-being. But if you don't really fundamentally believe it and walk it as an executive team, then you'll be called for BS very quickly. So don't try to overplay oh, I'm really good, I'm soft skilling, because here's the deal. In financial difficulties, with the uncertainty around us and the challenges that are definitely going to be faced by so many companies, there's going to be stress. And it's not easy to be, perfect in all domains. So I think that some element of this is amongst the employees to also, in their case, have empathy towards the leadership and understand their situation, the stress that they have to live through, and not expect them to live like saints and be perfect in all manner. So I think the term I like to use is be fair and firm, which you can do with empathy and allows you to proceed. And again, not being an arse in the way you deliver messages that sometimes are hard to accept.
Yeah, and I was having trouble with the word okay, because I suppose that people's circumstances are so different. So
Sure.
I suppose that part of this is taking sufficient interest in people as individuals and understanding what for them is okay. Does that make sense?
Well, it does. I think it brings up the notion of who you hire as well. And if you have a general corpus of people, you also need to organize that around the customer. So you can't be tailoring everything to individuals. And if you have that situation, you're going to pull your hair out, because you can't have everybody who wants to come in. I want to come in on Mondays between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. The other person who wants to, you're going to have some policies. You're going to have to make some decisions. And while you can always have exceptions and have, in certain cases, greater flexibility than in others, in a large organization, it's very tricky to try to be tailoring to everybody. If you're a smaller outfit with 20 employees, by the way, that's probably your strongest selling point in order to get great employees, is that you can provide greater flexibility because you're not stuck with administration and bureaucracy. But let's be realistic about what we're trying to achieve. And if you're a large organization with, 10,000, whatever, 100,000 employees, you need to have policies in place. And the idea of total flexibility, adaptability, it's lovely in principle, like so many of these ideas, lovely in principle, but completely unfeasible.
So I guess that's one of the key challenges for leaders today, is because there's so much pressure for tailoring,
Yeah.
and more and more people are trying to lay down or dictate, or certainly to ask very firmly for what they want, and are saying, well, if you can't give me that, I should go elsewhere. So there's a new balancing act going on.
Well, I totally is. I mean, record numbers of people with disengagement, the sort of quiet quitting, the great resignation, great reset, and lots of people wondering why they're working. And I think that if you can position what you're trying to achieve around a greater purpose, a greater why, without it being some sort of hallelujah why, some sort of utopian type of purpose, which is about saving the world, then if you put it underneath that umbrella of an idea, you have a greater chance of getting people engaged in your decision. The idea being, this is my purpose, and this is our strategy to achieve this purpose, and by the way, perform. For that reason, we need to be doing X, Y, and Z. Then that explanation, that why, can really help soften the blow of, you can't just do whatever you want. But you really need to think through these things, of course, because you also have things like, well, the type of business you're in. Do you need employees that are with a specific skill set? And if locally you don't have it, well, you need to hire people in Czech Republic, or wherever, that shows my age, or somewhere else. And then you really need to think about a remote work, because that's how you're going to get the best employees, best talent, in order to accommodate or address your customer needs. So there's no one size fits all. And, in certain countries, different regulations. I think we're going to see remuneration changes as we try to adapt to whether you want to or not come into the office, depending on the commute, depending on the situations. So there's a whole lot more that needs to happen. And here's the point for me, Tom, is that as we look at all these changes, adding more empathy into the process can only help. Generally speaking, there's a gap between how much empathy employees wish and what they see and feel. So the way they ascribe empathy to their CEO, generally he or she suffers from a deficit of empathy compared to what they wish. So it's sort of an abyss if you're trying to match that level of empathy required or desired, that desire for total flexibility. And you inevitably have a tension, which I think is also inherent in anything that's strategic. You can't do everything, and you have limited resources, you have limited time, and you can't try to have some sort of polymorphic organization if you have a specific client and a type of product you have to do. You have to structure it out, and that will be, along with the talent you have, your advantage, your competitive advantage.
Yeah. So one of your books, Future Proof, is about how to prepare yourselves for the next big disruption. What do you think that will be, and how can businesses future-proof themselves?
Well, there are many things that are disrupting and still disrupting. At the time, I was more specifically with Caleb, my co-author, looking at the technological elements of disruption. So that was sort of architecting the book and informing the types of disruptions that are happening. The disruptions have since become otherwise. We wrote that book in 2017. So the issue is the pandemic and the war and the rise of the economic situation that's been created out of the pandemic and the war. And so there's other forms of disruption we must allow. Here's the good news, I think, that the 3 first chapters of the book had nothing to do with tech, and really are about the way to future-proof your organization, regardless of the type of disruption ahead. And the very first chapter, looking back, I'm just so excited and happy that that's what it was. The very first chapter is all about having more meaningfulness in what you do. If you can insert more meaningfulness into your business, all the way up to having a greater purpose, but not just, you have a chance of garnering greater motivation, attracting better talent, and making, therefore, a better solution for your customers. If you start with this idea, then that meaningfulness will encourage your employee base, and they are the ones delivering the customer excellence who are paying to buy your products and services. And that is how you make a sustainably profitable long-term business. The other two chapters, Tom, just to finish on that, were the second one was about responsibility. And the idea there was the notion not just about being responsible for the planet and stuff, but also about taking personal responsibility and inserting that as a part of the way you create a culture in a company where people feel that they have personal responsibility. And there's a whole way to get that to happen. And the third chapter, a third most important piece in terms of mindsets, is collaboration and having creating an environment where people want to collaborate, participate with their whole selves, as opposed to holding back information as the old style management used to do.
So when I hear you say meaningfulness, I mean, for me, that speaks of purpose, and yet you went on to say to a greater purpose. Can you sort of unpick that a little?
Surely. So, Caleb and I just came up with 5 different ways of creating meaningfulness, because at the end of the day, going for the big purpose, the overriding, we're saving the world, doing something huge, is lovely, but not really realistic for so many companies. You take the insurance companies. At the very beginning, they came from a big place of purpose, which was essentially funding the adventure and exploration of the world. Without insurance, they wouldn't have been able to afford the risky adventures of taking a ship to God knows where to discover God knows what's land and what knows types of people. So that's how insurance came around. It had a huge worldwide benefit, which was tremendous. Does that exist today? Little. It's more about the little fine print and how we can screw our customers in some kind of way of not paying any payouts for some kind of disaster. So they've forgotten their purpose. But it doesn't mean they can't have some forms of meaningfulness. And meaningfulness can be, for example, giving a team a really challenging project to achieve. In a warlike situation, that might be a band of brothers that has to do something very dangerous together. In the business context, it can be, this is a really interesting challenge. You've got to go out there and you have to recruit 2 new customers that have never wanted to answer our call before. Or here, we've got to make this project. We only have this budget, but this is the most strategic thing we're going to be doing for the entire year. So it's meaningful for our strategy. If you can link it to what you're trying to achieve as a company, so strategic imperatives already being meaningful, because that's a choice you've made. Being part of a winning team is meaningful, because if you're part of a losing team all the time, that can be crushing. So there are different ways, and having play is meaningful. If you have a time of bonding and laughing together, just that is more meaningful than sort of the number crunching, soul defying types of work that some leaders expect of their teams. Adding in some levity, making people feel heard. That makes me feel, well, I'm meaningful because I'm actually participating and contributing. All right, it's better if you're doing that sort of contribution or playing with a team that's leading to a bigger purpose. But just by itself, those activities do provide meaningfulness for people.
Okay, thank you. That sort of makes it a lot clearer. So therapeutic AI is another passion of yours. Can you explain what is therapeutic AI and how fast is it developing?
Well, we're not there yet, is the short answer to that, Tom. So let me lay up this piece, which is that we're in a world where, depending on the country, depending on how you define disorders, mental health, anxiety, depression is vast and terrifyingly high in younger adults, 18 to 24, with depressing levels of suicides, and so there's certainly a huge demand for psychotherapy. The issue is you can't sort of invent overnight psychotherapists. They have to get trained, they have to practice it and be available. And today, in virtually all the Western countries, including Australia, just to be exact, there are studies that show that there's a deficit of therapists available, that waiting lists are being closed, they're not taking on new clients. And that is a problem if you want to get a therapist. I specifically, personally had that situation. And you can sometimes get better access through remote therapy, which is better than nothing. But I really wanted a person-to-person situation, and that wasn't possible in my area in Western London. So I had personal experience, and I've seen all the statistics. So that leads us to, well, what other solutions might there be? And there are a number of really interesting initiatives in the United States in particular, who are looking to use artificial intelligence as a therapeutic solution. If you go back to the 60s, when ELIZA, the very first, essentially, artificial intelligence came around, ELIZA was brilliant because she, essentially, was a Rogerian-style therapist, essentially making the people who are typing into the computer feel heard, which at some level is what some people are suffering from. They just don't feel heard. And so there's going to be ways, lighter touch to bigger touch, that therapy through AI will be effective. Just take, for example, when people are feeling suicidal, and I'm no psychotherapist, but the discussions I've had with psychotherapists is it's really important to be there in the moment. So that helpline is vital. If you really feel it, the urge, you got the number, you call. That action of going to call is very important. Having a human being who answers, or some kind of answer, not like a message that says, your call is important to us. We'll be right there. At 2 a.m., when these types of thoughts might be happening, not as obvious and easy to have a therapist available. You might get a helpline, which is not a therapist, but someone who's going to help try to assuage or diminish, diffuse the real stress. So I think of AI as a potential solution. And these people are working on these. They're generally coming from psychotherapy with some geekiness, and they're working on figuring out how to, make the conversation relevant, natural, and also injecting what types of advice, counsel, just where they want to go. The challenge is huge. Obviously, there's always the risk involved with not giving the right advice. But there's also just the reality of trying to deal with all the differences that we have. And the more data I have on the individual who's typing in, the more able I'm to provide a contextually relevant piece of advice. So there's going to be permission needs. There's going to be different types of therapeutic programming, whether it's cognitive behavior therapy or Rogerian or whatever comes up with. And they're working on this. Right now, we're far from having something that's publicly available. And the funny thing, Tom, is that they are working, a lot of these processes and the learning is actually happening through using AI in business situations. And that learning data set will end up being the foundation for moving into proper therapeutic AI. Long answer to a short question.
Yeah, it's important. And, I can see the ups and I can see some real potential downs. It's, I guess, the brave new world of AI. So how does the new generative AI change the way businesses should operate? And what can we expect in, I don't know, 20 years seems an awful long time, but in 20 years' time?
Well, the answer about 20 years' time is a shitload, but I'm not capable of explaining. I mean, I'm barely capable of explaining 3 years. So there's a couple of things that are interesting about this. And one is to be aware that this didn't just happen with ChatGPT. And so I think when I write about in Future Proof, it's also about what type of sources do you have to understand that this is happening? Because, of course, I was aware of these types of movements well before ChatGPT, which is why I started writing the book at the time, Heartificial Empathy, second edition. And here's some of the interesting elements to it. First of all, there's the access to all the data, and that the size of the data, the language, the learning models mushroomed. The second thing, and this is probably the insight that's less available to people, or less aware, is that they finally congregated all the different expertises in AI. Whereas before, the expertise was very segmented. So figuring out how to understand the voice, the sound of the voice, figuring out how to move from the words that I'm saying into a text, or vice versa. Looking at the eye movement and the ability for the eye muscle that now can move 900 times in a second, that subtlety to be able to dissect what's being expressed by the eyes, that each of these is complicated. And finally, they're now sort of moving towards the congregation of all these expertises in order to be much more sophisticated in their ability to understand what's being expressed by individuals, which is why it's very likely that therapeutic AI will be happening. As far as what businesses should be thinking about with all this, basically, if you're in business and you haven't started thinking about it, my first injunction might be, let's get on the program, because it's going to happen and it will have an impact. And I really don't care what your business is. It's going to have an impact, whether it's on the creative process, the delivery, the management of your teams. Everything will have an ability. It's not just people who are in lawyers or journalists. I mean, really everybody will be able to somehow benefit from. And there will be change, and there will be people who will have to reskill, and there will be layoffs, and there will be businesses that will disappear. So I think it would behoove most leadership teams to actually have some kind of special committee thinking about how this is going to change, how they're going to take advantage of it, what are the risks and dangers. It's really a whole new world. And whether it's the ability to improve the design, to create content, to manage your people, to take the decisions. I mean, really, it's all over. It's going to be a vast change.
We're sort of, we need to sort of bring things to a close. It's been fascinating speaking with you, and we've covered an awful lot of ground in a short time. And just before we do, you've got that thing behind you, Heartificial Empathy, and there's a tennis ball there. What's the significance?
Well, Tom, let's say that this is, I think, perhaps the most relevant piece, which is be you, fully you, all the time. And that doesn't mean I'm the same exact person when I'm in the shower than I'm in a boardroom. I'm wearing a tie, all right? One's naked, one's got a tie, all right? So obviously there's nuance to what I'm saying, but be your full self. And it took me a while to do this. I write about how I moved from the tie to the tie-dye. And so that was a reference to the fact that I spent a lot of my time, and I'll bring up my good old friend, Jerry Garcia, going to the Grateful Dead and experiencing psychedelics for fun. Psychedelics, turns out, can also be very healthy for the mind. The point of this ball, so this is not a tennis ball, it is a paddle tennis ball. So I was a tennis pro in my youth, and at least played a reasonable level of tennis and squash. But the game I started playing in 1974, its very first public court in Marbella, was a paddle tennis court. And this is this game that's between tennis and sort of big size ping pong and squash. It's a very specific game. It's the fastest growing sport in the world outside of America, of course, where everything's different. Pickleball.
Pickleball,
Anyway,
that's right. It's all about pickleball, isn't it?
Yeah, over there. And, I'm sure it's fun and all that. I've played, but if you really want a good workout and you want to have fun, paddle tennis, it's played with a smile. It's got a Spanish touch. A beer is almost necessary as part of the sign off of the game. And it's so entertaining to watch as well as to play. So so this is it. I have this paddle tennis ball to remind me this is how I sweat. This is who I am as an individual. This is where I come from at some levels. This really informed my life. And I like to insert personal into the professional. So that's why the ball's there. Be
Thank you.
yourself, Tom. That's the thing. And allow for yourself with your foibles, the imperfections, the differences, and stop trying to be perfect. Stop trying to say you're always good. Stop trying to do always good. Because we are inhuman. We as humans, we have these foibles, and that's the desire, the delicacy of the human being, is that we smell, we make mistakes, and if we can't accept those things, that is going to cause great disappointment, and I think is partly responsible for the mental health issues that we've been forcing upon ourselves today.
Yes, it's grist for the mill there. I mean, that's part of the things that we're going to be exploring on the retreat in September, is that what is driving you, you know, because I think there's so much unconsciousness. You say be yourself, and I think for a lot of people, they say, well, who is that? I don't know, I've never really met them. And yet I'm busy.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tom. You know, I also think that a lot of people may think they know who they are, but they haven't done the hard work. They present themselves on Instagram thinking this is me. They do the be real, thinking the be real is me, but that's not satisfactory work. That's not enough work. And on the really underneath it, it's the ability to accept the imperfect me. And because that's a real challenge. You know, I'm not always perfect. I can be grumpy. I can be a shit sometimes, or I can upset people. And not that I should stop at that. In other words, you can always improve, but to be able to understand your imperfect side, the darker side, sometimes the naughtier side, whatever, and allow that to be part of you. It'll allow you to identify what you can work on and improve. 2, it'll hopefully avoid the chip on shoulder kind of reactions, jerk, as in when you're a jerk reactions that come out, you know, under stress.
Yeah. So this one final question. What makes a good leader in 2023, do you think? And can you share 3 ways that an organization and its leaders can become more empathic?
Right. So what makes for a good leader? Well, I fundamentally think being a good leader is a people person. Most businesses are run by people, dealing with people, even if you're making widgets. And so what does that mean? Well, on one hand, I think it's about being authentic to who you are. If you can really work on who you are. I like to use the expression, be firm and fair, because I really think, especially as you say, in 2023, we also have a lot of economic hardship and, or at least a gloomy, if not cloudy, outlook. So trying to be nice probably won't cut it. You need to survive as a business, and you can do it in fair ways. So being a human-led person, it sounds obvious, but just so not true for so many leaders who tend to think about extrinsic factors. They tend to worry about the amount of money they're making. And really, if you had a little bit more consciousness about how really, truly unimportant you are, you might put things back into perspective. And as for being more empathic, there are many ways to do it. But I'm going to talk about one thing important, which is thinking about being empathic at home. It's a tremendous way to start, because we tend to think about being empathic leaders. So then you come home and you do things which aren't quite as lovely. There's a thing called close communication bias, which is also relevant in business when you've been working with the same team for a long time. Close communication bias is a thing, and it means that you tend to think you know what the other person's thinking and feeling all the time. So you might cut them off. You might, in their minds, be rude to them. And you think you're just being collaborative and complicitous, but wait a second, that's not what I meant. And so close communication is an opportunity to a wake-up call to practice empathy at home. And that could be just, hey, listen, just listen to what the other person's feeling and dig in on that.
Respect.
Respect and regain the curiosity for the other person. At some level, that's a signal of love. And then two other ways to be more empathic. The issue with so many leaders is that the teams that they're leading live different lives. You mentioned that before. So you might have your country home, your jet taking you to travel, and some members of the team don't have that. They might be occasionally taking EasyJet if they have even traveled. They might be living in a hovel part of their parents' home, or many other options. And so understanding that other people have different contexts. Well, how do you do that? Well, sometimes you might explore, for example, through fiction or well-done films where they are about other people. And you can, through the novel or the film, if it's well done, try to lean into these other characters. For example, if you're a man, read books that are about women, presumably also written by women. And you might find yourself discovering another sort of way of thinking, another way of expressing. And that might help you with dealing with and interfacing with women. And then another way is talk to strangers. We barely have time for listening to ourselves, much less talking with our spouses. But I think part of this whole gig of empathy is about learning to take the time to listen, and listen in a way where you are showing genuine curiosity about different people. So next time you're on the street, you're going shopping, invest a minute more of your time and have a conversation with the receptionist or with the person doing the bags at your grocery or paying the till, and ask them questions. So thank you for your help. And what's your name? My name is, such. And then, oh, that's great. And talk to them like a normal person. And then re-listen to them. Ask them, how's your day going? You start off, you obviously have to do some small talk when you're talking to a stranger, but re-engage with people you don't know and try to learn how their lives are different from yours. These are good little tips to start being more empathic.
There's some beautiful tips in there, Minter, and thank you. We've run out of time, and I've really enjoyed this and learned some things. So it's
never too old to learn, Tom. I hope this is our day, right? Keep it going. Keep that thirst for curiosity and learning.
Absolutely, yes. It was my birthday last week, but someone said, "Do you feel a year older?" And I said, "No." It's all about learning, I think.
Learning in relationships. Keep wishing to learn, and keep focus on the important people in our lives.
Yeah, great way to end. Minter, thank you very much indeed. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Un grand plaisir, Tom. Thank you.